the bride he wouldn't touch. Night in Vireholm Castle didn't feel like darkness. It felt like velvet pulled slowly over the world, soft and heavy, as if the sky itself was trying to keep a secret. Candlelight moved across tall stone walls, and the air carried a clean coldness mixed with the faint scent of old roses that never truly died. Roya stood at the center of it all, wearing a simple dress instead of a crown, because she didn't want anyone to bow to her. Not yet. Not until she earned it. Her hands were steady, but her heart was. She had practiced courage the way some people practiced piano, daily, stubbornly, even when her fingers trembled. Across the hall, King Kael of the Night Court watched her with the stillness of a statue. His coat was dark, his posture perfect, his face unreadable. But his eyes were not cold. They were tired. Not the tired of sleep, but the tired of carrying a promise that never stops being heavy. Roya had been told many stories about him. That he was ruthless, that he was dangerous, that he only cared about power. But when she finally met him, what she felt first wasn't fear. It was loneliness, his loneliness, like a wind that slipped under the door and wrapped around her ankles. "My king," she said softly, trying to keep her voice from cracking. "You asked for a wife." Kael's jaw tightened, like her words were a blade he'd stepped into on purpose. He didn't come closer. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't even smile the way a groom should. "I asked for a peace treaty," he replied, his voice low and controlled. "A queen is the price." That should have hurt her pride, but Roya wasn't here to win an argument. She was here to stop a war. Her village lay beyond the black pines, where humans and Nightborn had learned to fear each other for so long that even kindness sounded like a trick. She took a slow breath and did something the advisors never expected. She laughed. Not cruelly, not loudly, just a small, warm laugh that surprised even her. "Then let's be honest," she said. "I didn't come here to be wanted. I came here to be useful." The hall grew quiet. Some nobles stared at her like she'd insulted the throne. But Kael's eyes flickered, just once like a candle catching air. Useful. That word struck him harder than beautiful ever could. Because beauty asked for desire, useful asked for purpose, and purpose was safer. Roya stepped forward, closing some of the distance he refused to cross. The stone floor was cold under her shoes. She could feel every heartbeat in the room. Vampires had sharp senses, and their silence was never empty. "I know what they whisper about you," she said, watching his face for any crack in that calm mask. "That you don't feel, that you don't care, that you marry for control." Kael didn't deny it. He only looked past her shoulder, as if he couldn't bear to look directly at what he had chosen. "You should stop listening to whispers," he said. "I don't," Roya answered. "I listen to people." That made him glance back at her, really look. And for the first time, she noticed it, the faintest tremor in his fingers, hidden by his sleeve. Like he was holding himself in place with sheer will. Roya lowered her voice. "Tell me the real rule of this castle." Kael's eyes darkened. "There are many." "No," she insisted gently. "The one that matters, the one everyone follows but nobody says out loud." Kael didn't answer immediately. The candle flames bent slightly, as if the room itself was leaning in. Finally, he said, "No one touches the king." The words fell between them, like a locked door. Roya felt a sting behind her eyes, but she refused to let tears win on her first night. "Because you don't want to be touched," she guessed. Kael's expression barely changed, but his voice softened in a way that made the truth feel worse. "Because I can't trust what happens when I am." Roya swallowed. "You mean your hunger?" Kael's gaze dropped to her throat, not in a hungry way, but in a terrified way, like a man staring at a fire he had spent his whole life trying not to light. "Yes," he said, "and before you tell yourself you're different, understand this. I have buried the desire to feed. I have buried the desire to be comforted. I have buried the desire to be loved. He looked back up, and for a second his control slipped enough for her to see the raw honesty underneath. I am a king because I am disciplined. If I stop being disciplined, I become a monster. Roya's chest tightened. She'd expected arrogance. She'd expected coldness. She hadn't expected a man who treated his own heart like a dangerous animal. He refused to set free. Roya reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out something small, a ribbon, faded blue, tied around a plain silver bell. It was the kind shepherds used, the kind that sounded gentle, not sharp. I brought you a gift, she said. Kael's brows drew together. Why? Because you're a person, Roya replied, and her voice did not shake this time. Not just a treaty. She held out the bell. The nobles shifted. A servant froze. Even the candles seemed to hesitate. Kael stared at the gift like it was a trap. Then, slowly, he extended his hand, but he didn't take it from her palm. He took the ribbon, careful not to brush her skin, as if her warmth might undo him. The bell gave a tiny sound, soft, almost childlike. And Kael flinched. Roya blinked. What is it? Kael closed his fist around the ribbon, and for a moment his eyes looked far away, as if he'd been pulled into a memory he didn't want. That sound, he said quietly, it's from before. Before what? Roya asked. Kael's throat moved as he swallowed something heavier than blood. Before I became king, he admitted. Before I learned how to survive my own thirst. Roya's heart beat faster. She didn't know what she'd just uncovered, but she could feel the story underneath it, like the floorboards of this castle were built over grief. Kael took one step back, putting distance between them again. His voice hardened, not with anger but with fear. Listen to me carefully, Roya. You will have everything a queen is owed. Respect, safety, power. His eyes met hers, and the next words sounded like a punishment he was giving himself. But you will never have me. Roya's mouth went dry. You can't decide that for both of us, she whispered. I already have, Kael said, and the candlelight caught something wet in his eyes that he refused to let fall. For your own good. Roya wanted to argue, to demand, to force him to face what he was running from. But she saw it then. This wasn't rejection born of pride. It was rejection born of protection. He was afraid of hurting her. And somehow, that hurt more. Roya took a careful step closer and stopped at the edge of his invisible boundary. Then let me make you a deal, she said softly. If you won't let me love you, at least let me understand you. Kael's expression cracked, just slightly. Understanding me will not make you safer. It might make you kinder to yourself, Roya replied. For a moment, the entire hall felt like it was holding its breath. Even the nobles who disliked her couldn't look away. Then Kael turned sharply, his cape sweeping like a shadow across the floor. He headed toward the tall doors that led into the inner corridor, the part of the castle no one entered without permission. Roya's stomach dropped. Where are you going? Kael didn't stop walking. To lock away what you just awakened. Roya stared after him, and the bell's tiny sound echoed again as his fist tightened around it. At the doorway, he finally paused. His shoulders rose and fell once, as if he was struggling to breathe, though vampires didn't need to. He spoke without turning around. If you hear a bell ring at midnight, he said, voice strained and low, do not follow the sound. No matter what you think you hear, do not come. Roya's blood ran cold. Because she hadn't told him this part. The ribbon and bell she'd brought had belonged to her mother. And her mother had whispered one last warning before she died. If the vampire king ever hears this bell, it means he has met you before. Roya stood in the candlelit hall, the nobles watching, her heart pounding with a truth she wasn't ready for. Kael disappeared into the inner darkness, still holding her gift like it could save him or destroy him. And somewhere deep in the castle, behind stone and iron and old secrets, something answered him. A second bell rang. Not in Kael's hand. From far below the castle floors. Roya's breath caught as the sound trembled through the walls like a calling. Because the bell wasn't supposed to exist down there. And midnight was still hours away. Roya didn't move at first. She stood so still that the candle flames looked louder than her breathing, and the second bell's sound kept trembling through the stones as if the castle had a heartbeat of its own. The nobles tried to act normal again, but their eyes avoided the corridor where King Kael had vanished. People who lived with secrets learn how to look away on command. Roya wasn't built that way. She waited until the hall thinned, until only the servants remained to gather cups and fold fabrics, whispering to each other with tight faces. Then she made a decision that felt like swallowing fire. She would not chase the king, but she would chase the truth. A young guard stood by the archway, pretending not to notice her. He was tall and pale like the others, but his expression was too alive to be purely cruel. His name tag, stitched in silver thread, read Milo. Roya approached him carefully. "You heard it too," she said. Milo blinked, then let out a small breath like he'd been holding it for years. "I heard it," he admitted, "and I heard what His Majesty told you." "Don't follow," Roya replied, watching his face. "That's what kings say when they're terrified." Milo's lips twitched in a half-smile, like he wasn't sure whether to respect her or fear her. "You're braver than the last 3 advisors." "I'm not trying to be brave," Roya said. "I'm trying to be kind. Sometimes it looks the same." She glanced toward the corridor again, where the shadows seemed thicker than they should have been. "Tell me what's under this castle." Milo hesitated, then his voice dropped. "Old tunnels, a sealed chapel, a place they call the Hollow Vault." "And the bell?" Roya asked. His eyes flicked away. "No one rings bells down there." Roya's stomach tightened, but something did. Milo stared at her for a long moment, then leaned closer as if sharing a joke that wasn't funny. "You're human. You shouldn't be in this wing at night." Roya lifted her chin. "I'm his wife." Milo winced, like that word carried danger. "That's exactly why you shouldn't." For a second, Roya almost laughed, because of course the castle would treat wife like a problem instead of a bond. Then her smile faded. "Milo is the king good." The guard's expression softened in spite of himself. "He is," Milo whispered. "He's just doing it the hardest way possible." That was the first time anyone in Vireholm had spoken of Kael like a man, instead of a myth. Roya followed Milo through side corridors lit by dim blue lanterns. The air changed as they walked, becoming colder, cleaner, and strangely sweet, like crushed mint and wet stone. Tapestries gave way to bare walls. The castle stopped showing off and started hiding. At the end of a narrow stairwell, Milo paused. A heavy door waited there, marked with a simple symbol carved into the wood, a bell tied with ribbon. Roya's skin prickled. "That's my ribbon," she said, and she didn't know how she knew. It was just a feeling like recognizing handwriting. Milo swallowed. That door wasn't marked yesterday. Roya reached for the handle. Milo caught her wrist, not roughly but firmly. "If you open it," he warned, "you might not like what you learn." Roya held his gaze. "If I don't open it, I'll start believing the wrong stories." Milo let go. "Then I'll stand here, and if you run, I'll run too." It was a small promise, but it landed in Roya's chest like warmth. She opened the door. The air beyond was darker, but not empty. A faint glow pulsed along the floor, thin lines of silver etched into the stone like veins. Roya stepped inside, and the door creaked shut behind her with a sound that felt final. The hallway led downward, turning in a slow spiral. Each step echoed. Each echo sounded like a question. Then she heard something else, soft, uneven, like someone breathing through pain. Roya quickened her pace. The spiral ended at a wide chamber with a ceiling too high to see. There were no candles, no lanterns, only moonlight somehow filtering through cracks in the rock above, falling in pale stripes. And in the center of that cold, quiet space stood King Kael. He had removed his coat. His sleeves were rolled up as if he'd been working, not ruling. His hands were clenched, and his forehead was pressed against a tall stone pillar engraved with old writing. He looked like a man praying to something that never answered. Roya stopped at the edge of the light. Kael. His head snapped up so fast it startled her. For a moment his eyes flashed, not with rage but with raw alarm. Then he moved. Not toward her. In front of her. He stepped between Roya and the pillar, blocking her view like a shield. "I told you not to come," he said, and the words shook more than his voice. Roya's throat tightened. "You also told me I'd have safety. Secrets don't feel like safety." Kael's jaw tightened hard. "This secret is the reason you're safe at all." Roya tried to see around him. "What is that pillar?" Kael didn't answer. He couldn't. His hands trembled, and he curled them into fists again as if forcing his body to behave. Roya's voice turned gentler. "The bell rang, not the one you held, another one from down here. Why?" Kael's gaze dropped to the ground like he'd been caught doing something shameful. "Because it recognized you." The chamber seemed to tilt. Roya took a careful step forward. Kael immediately mirrored her, keeping the same distance, still blocking the pillar. It was almost funny in a sad way, like a king playing the world's most serious game of don't look behind me. Roya exhaled, and despite her fear, a small, real laugh slipped out. "Are you guarding a rock from your own wife?" For a heartbeat, Kael's face flickered with something close to amusement. It made him look younger. Then it vanished, swallowed by pain. "This isn't funny," he murmured. "I know," Roya said. "That's why I'm trying to make you breathe." Kael's eyes narrowed slightly, as if the kindness itself frightened him. "You don't understand what you're standing near." "Then tell me," Roya pleaded, more emotion rising than she expected. "Stop making decisions alone like loneliness is a virtue." That hit him. She saw it in the way his shoulders dropped a fraction, like her words slid into an old crack in his armor. Kael's voice lowered. 7 years ago, before I was king, there was a winter famine in the human villages. My council said, let them freeze. It would make the border quieter. Roya's chest tightened. "I couldn't," Kael continued, eyes fixed on nothing. "So I stole from my own stores and delivered food at night. I left it where no one would see me. I told myself it wasn't compassion. I told myself it was strategy." He let out a bitter breath. "It was." Roya stepped closer, slow and steady. "And you met someone." Kael's lips parted, but no sound came out at first. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet like ash. "A girl, half-starved, stubborn, still trying to smile at her little brother while her hands shook. She had a bell tied to a blue ribbon on her wrist. She used it to make him laugh when he cried." Roya's vision blurred. "That was my mother." Kael looked at Roya then, really looked, and there was grief in his eyes so deep it made her want to reach for him, even though he had built his whole life around not being reached. "I didn't touch her," he said quickly, like a confession and a defense at once. "I didn't feed. I only stayed long enough to make sure they ate, to make sure they lived." Roya's voice cracked. "Then why do you look like you're confessing a crime?" Because Kael wasn't just afraid of being a monster. He was afraid of being good. Good meant attachment. Good meant wanting. Wanting meant hunger. Hunger meant danger. Kael stepped back until his shoulder brushed the pillar behind him. The silver lines on the floor brightened faintly, reacting to his proximity, like the chamber recognized his distress. "The bell," he whispered, "was a marker, a vow." A vow to what? Roya asked. Kael swallowed hard. To never take what I could not deserve. Roya stared at him, confused and trembling. Kael, what did you do? His eyes shut for a moment, and when they opened again, the king looked like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. I asked your mother for one thing, he said. Not blood, not obedience. I asked her to forgive my kind before the world taught her to hate us. Roya's heart pounded. And did she? Kael's voice went thinner. She did. She tied this ribbon to a bell and said, if you ever forget you can be gentle, listen to this. Roya's knees nearly gave out. So the bell in her hand wasn't just a family keepsake. It was a promise passed down like a secret inheritance. Roya took another step, and this time Kael didn't mirror her. He stayed still, breathing slowly, fighting something inside himself. He looked at her as if she were both salvation and danger. I rejected you, he said, because the moment I saw you, I remembered her, and I realized the world had looped the ribbon back around my wrist. Roya whispered, you've been protecting my family for years. Kael's laugh was quiet and broken. I tried, from afar. I sent coin through shadows. I stopped raids before they started. I kept my name out of your village so my enemies wouldn't punish you for my softness. Roya's voice shook with sudden anger, not at him, but at the cruelty of his loneliness. Then why marry me at all? Kael's gaze dropped to her hands, to the place where her pulse beat. His control tightened visibly, like he was holding a storm behind his ribs. Because someone else asked for you, he said. Roya went cold. Who? Kael hesitated, and the chamber's silver lines pulsed brighter, as if the castle itself didn't want him to speak. He forced the words out anyway. The High Regent, he said. He thinks a human queen will make me look merciful while he takes the real power. He wanted you close, because your bloodline is tied to something older than my crown. Roya's mouth went dry. Tied to what? Kael finally moved his body, not away from her, but slightly aside, just enough for her to see what he'd been hiding. Carved into the pillar was an old relief, a woman holding a baby, a blue ribbon at her wrist, and a bell in her palm. Beneath it, in faded script, were words Roya somehow understood without knowing the language. The Heartbound line. The bell that can command a king. Roya's breath left her in a silent rush. Kael's eyes were pleading now. That's why I wouldn't touch you, he said. Because if you ever rang the true bell, my will would have to obey. Roya stared at the carving, then at him, horror and tenderness colliding in her chest. You think I would control you? I think the world will try, Kael whispered. And I think I would let it if it meant you stayed alive. Roya's hands curled at her sides. She wasn't afraid of his hunger anymore. She was afraid of his sacrifice. Behind her, the door they'd entered through gave a low groan. Roya turned sharply. The heavy wood began to swing open by itself, slowly, as if someone on the other side had all the patience in the world. A voice drifted in smooth, familiar from court sessions, soaked in false warmth. My king, the High Regent called. I wondered where you disappeared to. Kael's body stiffened like a blade being drawn. Roya felt the silver lines under her feet brighten, as if the chamber was waking up. And in the deep quiet that followed, a bell rang again, clearer this time, closer, like it was being carried down the steps by an unseen hand. Kael looked at Roya with naked fear. Because the sound wasn't coming from his fist. It was coming toward her. The bell's note slipped into the chamber like a thin thread of ice, and Roya felt it in her teeth before she heard it in her ears. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the kind of authority that didn't ask permission. Kael moved in front of her again, fast and instinctive, like his body had memorized one job, protect Roya, even when his mind begged him to choose something safer. The High Regent stepped into the moonlit stripes with a calm smile, dressed as if he'd come to a dinner instead of a sealed vault. He held a small lantern in one hand, and in the other, a bell tied to a bright blue ribbon that looked too new to be real. Roya's stomach turned. "That's not mine," she said. "No," the Regent replied smoothly. "Yours is older, this is a copy, a key made to fit a lock." He flicked his wrist and rang it once more. The sound rippled through the silver lines on the floor, making them glow brighter, as if the stone itself recognized the command and prepared to enforce it. Kael's face tightened. For a second he looked less like a king and more like a man trapped in a net. His hands trembled, then stilled, fighting, resisting, refusing to become a puppet. Roya stepped sideways, trying to see Kael's eyes. "Kael, look at me." He did, and the fear in him hit her like a wave. Not fear of the Regent, fear of failing her. The High Regent's smile widened. "Remarkable discipline, Your Majesty, but you know how the old pact works. A heartbound bell, rung with the right words, doesn't need your consent." He leaned his head, as if speaking to a pet. "Kneel." Kael's knee bent a fraction against his will. Roya's breath caught. She saw the battle inside him. His pride wasn't the thing holding him up. It was humility. A man who knew his own darkness and had spent years building walls to keep it from touching anyone. He gritted out, "Don't." The Regent's eyes flicked to Roya. "Ah, the human queen, the missing piece. You see, my dear, this kingdom is full of creatures who can't be ruled by ordinary laws. But old magic, old promises, those work." Roya's hands curled into fists. She felt hot anger rise, not because she was being threatened, but because Kael, who had carried kindness like a secret sin, was being treated like an object. Roya stepped forward until she was beside Kael's shoulder. She spoke quietly, not to the Regent, but to the king. "Your will is still here," she whispered. "I can feel it, hold on." Kael's throat moved. "Roya, if he controls me, I can't." "I know," she said, "so we do it together." The Regent lifted the bell again, ready to ring. "Bring her to me," he ordered. Kael's hand twitched, forced to obey, reaching toward Roya like a man being made to betray himself. Roya reacted before fear could freeze her. She did the one thing her mother had taught her when storms came. She used gentleness like a shield. She caught Kael's hand in both of hers. The chamber went still. Skin to skin. The forbidden touch. Kael stiffened as if struck by lightning, not from hunger, but from the shock of being held without fear. Roya felt the cold in his fingers, and underneath it, the faint tremor of someone who had waited too long for permission to be human again. Kael's eyes widened. "Roya, stop." "I'm not prey," she said, voice low and steady. "I'm your wife." The High Regent laughed softly. Romantic, but foolish. He rang the bell sharply. The silver lines flared. Kael's arm pulled hard, compelled to drag Roya forward. Roya's heart pounded, but she didn't let go. Instead, she leaned closer to Kael's ear and whispered the bravest words she had. "Choose me anyway." Kael's breath hitched. Something in his eyes changed, not into hunger but into decision. He straightened. He fought the magic, not by force, but by surrendering to something stronger than command. Love, yes, but also responsibility. The kind that says, "I will not harm her, even if I must break myself to prove it." Kael's voice came out rough. "Regent, you can ring whatever you like, you can push my body, but you cannot push my heart." The Regent's smile faltered. He rang again, harder, frustration sharpening his tone. "You will obey." Kael's knee bent once more, and Roya saw pain flash across his face. The compulsion was real. The old magic was brutal in its simplicity. So Roya made a different choice. She turned to face the Regent fully, still holding Kael's hand, and lifted her chin. "You're using a copy," she said. A fake ribbon, a stolen sound. The regent narrowed his eyes. Sound is sound. Roya shook her head. No, my mother's bell wasn't about control. It was about conscience. She slipped her free hand into the neckline pouch she'd sewn into her dress and pulled out her real bell. Faded ribbon, scuffed silver, soft as memory. The moment it appeared, the chamber's silver lines pulsed in recognition, not bright and harsh like the regent's command, but steady, like a lantern in fog. Kael's eyes locked onto it, and his expression broke. Not with desire. With grief. With gratitude. With the painful relief of a man seeing a promise return after years of believing he didn't deserve it. Roya, he whispered, don't ring it. The High Regent's voice sharpened. Ring it, he commanded her, stepping closer. If you truly want to protect him, you'll use what your bloodline was made for. Roya's hands trembled around the bell. She could feel the weight of the choice. If she rang it the way the pillar described, to command, she might save Kael in the moment and lose him forever afterward. He would never know if his kindness was his own. And that would destroy the very thing she admired most in him, the way he chose goodness even when no one watched. Roya looked at Kael. Is it true, she asked softly. If I ring it, you have to obey. Kael's voice came out like a confession. Yes. And if I don't, Roya said, eyes burning, the regent will keep doing this until you break. Kael didn't answer, because his silence was the answer. Roya closed her eyes, remembering her mother's hands, her mother's tired smile, the way she'd told Roya that power without compassion was just another kind of hunger. Then Roya opened her eyes and made the hardest choice. She rang the bell. But not at the regent. Not as a weapon. She rang it once, softly, and spoke words that weren't carved on the pillar, words no one could use to dominate. I ask for your freedom, she said, voice steady through the shaking. I ask for your true self to stay yours. The sound traveled through the chamber like a warm wind. The silver lines changed, shifting from sharp brightness into a gentle glow, as if the magic itself had been waiting centuries for someone to use it with humility. Kael jerked, not like a puppet, but like a man waking from a nightmare. The regent rang his copied bell again, but the note sounded thin now, wrong, like a fake coin dropped on stone. Nothing happened. His face tightened. That's not possible. Roya's eyes didn't leave his. It is, if the magic was never meant to enslave. Kael slowly lifted his head. His shoulders rose as he breathed in, a useless habit for a vampire, but a deeply human one. He looked at his hands, then at Roya, as if making sure he wasn't dreaming. The regent backed up a step, anger breaking his polished mask. Fine, he snapped. If I can't command the king, I'll remove the queen. He lunged forward, fast, desperate. Milo, the young guard, burst through the doorway at the same moment, panting like he'd run through half the castle. He threw himself between Roya and the regent with nothing but his body and a shaky kind of courage. Not her, Milo shouted, voice cracking. For an instant the regent froze, surprised that someone so small would dare. That instant was enough. Kael moved, not with cruelty, not with rage, but with the terrifying calm of a king who had chosen restraint his whole life, and finally allowed himself one necessary act. He stepped in front of Roya, one arm out, and his voice cut through the chamber like a final verdict. Enough. The silver lines on the floor flared and then settled, as if recognizing their rightful ruler again. The regent stumbled back, suddenly aware that his power had been borrowed, and the loan had been revoked. Kael didn't strike him. He didn't tear him apart. He did something far more humiliating and far more just. He spoke loud enough for Milo, and the listening walls to hear. You will be tried, Kael said, not punished in the dark. You will answer in the light. And every human village you starved of aid, every treaty you twisted for your gain, you will repair by serving them." The regent's mouth opened in shock. "You can't." "I can," Kael replied, voice steady, "because I am done being ruled by fear." The regent's expression curdled, but two shadows stepped out from the corridor behind Milo, other guards, loyal to the crown, drawn by the bell and the raised voices. They took the regent's arms, firm and controlled, and led him away. When the heavy door shut again, the chamber fell silent except for Milo's shaky breathing and Roya's heartbeat. Too loud, too human, too alive. Milo looked between them, eyes wide. Did that bell just... "It freed him," Roya said softly. Milo swallowed and gave a breathy, disbelieving laugh. "That's the strangest romance I've ever guarded." Roya almost laughed too, the tension breaking for half a second, but then she turned back to Kael. He was staring at her hands like he couldn't trust them to be real. His face had gone very still, and the tiredness in his eyes looked older than the castle. Roya stepped closer. "Kael." His voice was barely there. "You could have owned me." "I don't want to own you," she said. "I want to know you." Kael's throat moved. "You should be afraid." Roya's gaze didn't flinch. "I am, but courage isn't the absence of fear. It's what you do while it's here." She lifted his hand again, slowly, giving him time to pull away. He didn't. Kael's fingers closed around hers, careful, trembling, as if holding something precious for the first time. He looked down at their joined hands, and a quiet, stunned sound left him, almost a laugh and almost a sob. "I spent 7 years," he admitted, "believing distance was the only way I could love anyone safely." Roya's eyes filled. "And how did that work out for you?" A tiny, real smile touched his mouth. "Poorly." The air in the chamber felt different now, less like a prison, more like a place where truth could breathe. Roya lifted the bell by its faded ribbon. "My mother didn't leave this to make you a slave," she said. "She left it to remind you you're capable of gentleness. So am I." Kael's eyes shimmered, and for the first time since she met him, he looked at her not as danger or duty, but as home. Then the twist came, quiet, sudden, and sharp. The silver pillar behind him began to dim, the engraved words fading as if the magic had completed its purpose. But one line remained, burning faintly, newly revealed beneath the older carving. Roya leaned in, reading it aloud, her voice turning to a whisper. "The Heartbound bell frees the king, but binds the queen to his fate." Roya's breath caught. Kael stiffened. "What did it say?" Roya's mouth went dry. She looked at the bell in her palm, the same bell she'd used with kindness, the same bell that saved him. She hadn't expected it to take a price. Kael's eyes searched her face with sudden panic. "Roya, tell me." Roya forced herself to breathe, forced her voice to stay steady so she wouldn't frighten him. "It says, I'm tied to your fate now." Kael's face went pale in a way that had nothing to do with being a vampire. "No," he whispered. "No, I won't let it." Roya stepped closer, placing her free hand over his heart, over the place he'd treated like a locked room for 7 years. "You don't get to sacrifice yourself alone anymore," she said gently. "If we're bound, then we're bound together." Kael stared at her, torn between love and terror, between relief and guilt. Outside, far above them, the castle clock began to toll toward midnight. And in the quiet space between one toll and the next, Kael finally did what he'd refused for 7 years. He leaned forward, slow, careful, as if asking permission from the world, and pressed a kiss to Roya's forehead. It wasn't hungry, it wasn't possessive. It was gratitude. It was apology. It was a promise. Roya closed her eyes, letting herself feel it, letting herself believe that a man who feared his own darkness could still choose light. When she opened her eyes again, Kael was looking at the bell with dawning understanding and dread. "Roya," he said, voice tight, "the binding doesn't mean you'll share my throne." He swallowed. "It means you'll share my curse." The final clock toll sounded like a door shutting somewhere deep in the world. And Roya felt, just for a second, an unfamiliar coldness bloom under her skin, like winter taking its first breath. She didn't pull away. She tightened her grip on Kael's hand instead. "Then teach me," she whispered, "how you survived it without losing your kindness." Kael stared at her, and in his eyes was the beginning of something he'd never allowed himself to hope for. Not just love. A future. But the bell in Roya's palm gave one last, faint tremble, almost like a warning. Because whatever was waking inside her was waking hungry.